They say fear has a sound. Sometimes it's the snap of a twig in the dark. Sometimes it's the whisper of boots on sand. And sometimes, it's silence. A silence so heavy, so unnervingly calm, that even seasoned soldiers feel their hearts tighten in their chests. In the Pacific War, Japanese troops learned that silence well. The silence that came just before the Marines arrived. Dawn rises slowly over a nameless Pacific island, one of hundreds dotting a vast ocean that had turned into a battlefield stretching from horizon to horizon. The first rays of sunlight cut through the smoke drifting above shattered palm trees. Ash swirls in the humid wind like snow falling in reverse, bitter and warm. The landscape is unrecognizable. Charred trunks where forests once stood, cratered earth where villages once lay, and the twisted remnants of bunkers dug into volcanic soil. Somewhere beneath the debris, the muffled groans of the wounded carry through the haze. The shore is quiet now. The fighting ended hours ago. But the tension still grips the island like a clenched fist. A young Japanese soldier, his uniform torn and stiff with dried salt and blood, lies half buried in a collapsed firing trench. He had been awake all night, clutching his rifle until his hands felt numb. Every time he blinked he saw the same thing, dark figures coming through the smoke. Unwavering, unhurried, unstoppable. He had heard stories before, rumors passed in whispers, carried from island to island by the few survivors pulled from battlefields that swallowed entire battalions. Rumors about men who fought like machines, who didn't sleep, who moved through jungles as if the environment itself bent to hide them. But last night he saw them with his own eyes. The Marines. World War II's Pacific theater was unlike any war humanity had ever seen. It was not fought across long stretches of open fields, nor in the streets of ancient European cities. It was a war fought in places never meant for humans, razor-sharp coral reefs, jungles thick as walls, mountains of volcanic ash and cavern networks dark as tombs. Japan sent its soldiers, many hardened by years of conflict in China, trained from birth in the ethics of Bushido, raised to believe surrender was worse than death. America sent the United States Marine Corps. When these two forces collided for the first time in 1942, the world witnessed something neither side had anticipated. A clash not only of weapons and tactics, but of mental fortitude, discipline, and cultural identity. And from the first firefights on Guadalcanal, one truth began to circulate through Japanese units. The Marines were different. Different from the American soldiers they expected. Different from the European troops they had studied. Different from anything in the Japanese military manuals. Japanese intelligence officers noted it in their early reports. Field commanders wrote it in their diaries. Wounded soldiers whispered it to one another in underground infirmaries. The Marines are not ordinary Americans. They advance even when they are wounded. They do not fear night fighting. They shoot with terrible precision. There, beneath the hum of distant waves, beneath the crackle of fires dying in the rubble, he hears something. A series of metallic clicks, soft, deliberate. Boots shifting on hardened ash. Low voices speaking calmly, even in the aftermath of carnage. Marines clearing bunkers. He tries to steady his breath, pressing himself deeper into the dirt. But he knows it's useless. These Marines didn't rush blindly. They didn't shout. They didn't panic. They moved like men who had already accepted what they had to do. In the night before, he had watched them crawl forward even as machine gun fire tore into their lines. He saw one Marine shout orders while dragging a wounded comrade across open sand, bullets snapping past his head. He saw another Marine, face blackened with ash, leap into a trench with nothing but a bayonet. Where most armies collapsed under jungle chaos, the Marines thrived. Where bonsai charges aimed to break morale, the Marines held. Where Japanese officers expected hesitation, the Marines answered with fire and movement, disciplined, coordinated, unyielding. The Japanese soldier thought he had understood fear long before he reached this island. Last night proved him wrong. The Pacific War was a crucible. Every island was a battle. Every jungle trail was a gamble with death. And within this crucible, a legend was forged, written not by the Marines themselves but by the men who faced them. The Japanese troops who survived encounters with U.S. Marines described them with a complicated mix of fear and respect. They spoke of their relentless attacks, their refusal to surrender, their ability to fight through disease, dehydration, exhaustion, and firepower that seemed impossible to withstand. But most unsettling of all was their mindset. Japanese soldiers were raised in a culture of warrior ethos. Bushido, the way of the samurai. Death before dishonor. Victory through sacrifice. They expected Americans to be soft, unprepared, easily broken. Instead, they met warriors who seemed carved from the same stone, men who fought with the same grim acceptance, but with more resources, better coordination, and an adaptability that defied Japanese expectations. A Marine could lose half his squad and still carry forward. A Marine could be shot and still return fire accurately. A Marine could be ambushed and still find a way to outflank his attackers. This was not just strength. This was identity. The deeper the war progressed, the more the Japanese commanders realized a devastating truth. Fighting Marines was not just difficult. It was uniquely dangerous. Marines excelled in environments where sanity frayed. The jungle, the night, the smoke-filled trenches where every shadow hid a blade. They fought with a combination of discipline and ferocity that Japanese officers struggled to counter. And as the campaigns dragged across the Pacific, Tarawa, Peleliu, Saipan, Iwo Jima, the Japanese perception of the Marine Corps evolved from respect to dread. The Marine landing was not just a tactical event. It was a psychological blow. On some islands, Japanese troops scribbled warnings on walls for incoming reinforcements. Beware the Marine raiders. They climb over their dead. They cannot be stopped. Whether these statements were exaggerations or raw truth hardly mattered. In war, perception is power. And the perception of the Marines became a weapon in itself. Tonight, we journey back into that world of jungle shadows and volcanic battlegrounds. We read the diaries the Japanese left behind. We traced their reports. We examined the words they used when describing the Marines, their shock, their grudging admiration, their fear. Because to understand why these two forces fought with such intensity, you have to understand the mindset on both sides. You have to understand what the Japanese expected, and what the Marines delivered. This is not a story of propaganda. This is not myth. This is the enemy's voice. And the truth revealed in those voices is far more dramatic than legend. This is the story of how the Japanese saw the U.S. Marines, why they feared them, why they respected them, and how their encounters changed the course of the Pacific War. The jungles remember, the islands remember, and the men, on both sides, carried those memories for the rest of their lives. Now we step onto those islands once more. The first encounter, Guadalcanal, 1942. The Pacific War's first major ground confrontation between the U.S. Marines and Japanese soldiers occurred in August 1942, on the dense, rain-soaked island of Guadalcanal. For Japanese commanders, the American invaders were just another foreign army, supposedly inexperienced, ill-prepared for jungle warfare, and likely to collapse under disciplined assault. But what they encountered was a shock. The Marines landed under the cover of darkness, moving cautiously yet deliberately across coral beaches and tangled jungle. The humid night air carried the scent of gunpowder and salt. Fireflies flickered amidst the twisted foliage, masking the flashes of distant gunfire. Japanese patrols, expecting timid defenders, were met with unyielding fire. When the first banzai charges erupted from Japanese positions, they found themselves facing a coordinated, disciplined defense that refused to break. Machine guns covered overlapping fields of fire, grenades and rifle volleys tore into their ranks. In the chaos, Japanese soldiers began to notice something unnerving. These Americans didn't panic. They didn't flee. Even when outnumbered or pinned down, Marines returned fire with precision and calm. By dawn, the riverbeds were littered with fallen Japanese soldiers. Survivors whispered stories of men who climb over their dead and keep going, a phrase that would echo through Japanese units for months. Guadalcanal shattered Japanese assumptions. They had not fought mere soldiers. They had fought an unbreakable, adaptable force. The relentless reputation grows. After Guadalcanal, the word about the Marines' ferocity and discipline spread across Japanese ranks. Diaries and letters from surviving soldiers describe an enemy that seemed almost superhuman. They do not sleep. They move silently at night. Even when shot, they continue forward. Stories circulated of small Marine squads infiltrating defensive lines under cover of darkness, eliminating sentries with knives and bayonets, disappearing into the jungle before reinforcements could respond. For Japanese soldiers trained to anticipate fear in their enemy, these tactics were alien and terrifying. The Marines' training emphasized initiative, aggression, and mental toughness. Unlike Japanese forces expecting rigid hierarchical orders, Marine NCOs often took immediate command when necessary. This adaptability made them unpredictable and lethal. The psychological impact was profound. Soldiers began to fear not just the bullets or bayonets, but the human mind behind them. Every encounter became a trial of endurance and nerve. By the time Marines rotated to a new island, Japanese troops had learned to regard them with cautious dread. Tarawa, Blood on the Shore, November 1943. The Battle of Tarawa was the moment Japanese troops learned that American resilience could match any fortification. The atoll of Bidio, a tiny piece of land in the Gilbert Islands, had been transformed into a fortress. Concrete bunkers, barbed wire, and fields of landmines awaited the approaching Marines. The Japanese commander, confident in his defenses, boasted, "A million men cannot take Tarawa in 100 years." The Marines landed under relentless fire. They waded through shallow, coral-choked waters as machine guns tore into the surf. Tanks floundered, ammunition belts emptied, yet the Marines pressed forward inch by bloody inch. Japanese survivors later wrote in grim, awe-filled words, "They come from the water like demons. Even when shot, more follow. They climb over the bodies of their fallen comrades and advance." 76 hours of continuous combat, hand to hand, bunker to bunker, trench to trench, ended with the Marines victorious. But what lingered in Japanese minds was not defeat, it was astonishment at the Americans' tenacity. It was the first time Japanese troops were forced to respect an enemy not merely for firepower, but for unshakable courage and relentless aggression. In the Pacific, nature itself was an enemy. Tropical heat, disease, venomous insects, and treacherous terrain tested soldiers as much as bullets or artillery. The Japanese often assumed their experience in the jungles of China or Southeast Asia gave them an advantage. Yet the Marines adapted astonishingly fast. They learned to move silently through thick undergrowth, to camouflage positions, to set ambushes, and to maintain discipline under unrelenting stress. Even in the dead of night, small units would maneuver through Japanese lines, striking targets with surgical precision. Japanese soldiers wrote about this adaptability with disbelief. "They're like iron. They advance even when many fall." By combining rigorous training with mental resilience, Marines turned the jungle itself into a weapon. Japanese defenders who had long relied on banzai charges and entrenched positions, found their tactics undermined by an enemy who could anticipate, adapt, and outmaneuver them at every turn. By mid-1944, battles like Saipan and Peleliu demonstrated to Japanese troops that the Marines were not only skilled fighters, they were strategic, coordinated, and psychologically formidable. Artillery, tanks, naval bombardments, and close air support were synchronized with infantry assaults in ways that overwhelmed Japanese defenses. Yet what frightened soldiers the most was how the Marines themselves used these weapons. Japanese diaries describe scenes that blur the line between reality and legend. The sky, the earth, and the sea moved together against us. The men themselves were like beasts, unyielding, unstoppable. Even highly trained Japanese units, prepared for protracted resistance, began to anticipate the Marines' tactics with trepidation. Reports mention isolated acts of heroism by individual Marines that were discussed in whispers across defensive lines. Small squads holding positions alone, returning fire despite wounds, capturing key points against impossible odds. The psychological toll was undeniable. Troops wrote of fear mingled with admiration, a rare acknowledgement of the enemy's valor. By 1945, Japanese troops were no longer curious about the Marines. They were terrified. Iwo Jima, a volcanic island in the Bonin Chain, was intended as a strategic airfield for the Japanese. Its defenders, numbering over 21,000, prepared intricate tunnel networks, bunkers, and hidden artillery positions. They had orders to fight to the last man. And they did. When the Marines landed, they faced a hailstorm of fire from hidden positions. The black volcanic sand slowed every step. Mortars and machine guns erupted from the earth itself. The Marines pressed forward regardless. In 36 days of brutal combat, they fought inch by inch, crater by crater, and bunker by bunker. Japanese accounts from the surviving soldiers are haunting. Even wounded, they attacked. Even dying, they shot accurately. Their spirit was unbelievable. No man should be able to endure this, yet they did. The defenders realized something crucial. It wasn't just firepower that made the Marines formidable. It was mental fortitude and training. It was their ability to fight under unbearable conditions, to keep moving when all seemed lost, to turn chaos into opportunity. Iwo Jima solidified the legend, and the fear. Across the Pacific campaigns, several consistent observations emerged among Japanese troops. Relentless aggression. Marines never yielded ground even in the face of superior numbers or devastating fire. Adaptability. Small unit tactics allowed them to overcome entrenched Japanese positions unexpectedly. Leadership under fire. Non-commissioned officers took initiative, keeping squads functional even when officers fell. Mastery of night fighting. Japanese troops expected night to be an advantage. Marines neutralized it, fire discipline. Bullets were not wasted, every shot counted. Morale under fire. Even when surrounded or wounded, Marines continued to advance. Close quarters combat. From knives to flamethrowers, Marines thrived in the trenches and tunnels. Japanese soldiers often describe the Marines with words that mix fear and admiration. They fight like beasts but with human cunning. They do not retreat even when they should. We expected Americans to break, they did not. What emerges is a startling conclusion. The Japanese feared not just the firepower or numbers of the Marines, but the very human quality of their courage, an unyielding spirit that mirrored the ideals Japanese soldiers themselves held but had never seen executed with such consistency by a Western force. By the end of the war, Japanese commanders recognized the Marines as the most formidable opponent they had faced. Field reports and post-war memoirs are filled with acknowledgement. Their fighting spirit is unparalleled. We cannot defeat men who do not fear death. The Marine Corps is a force to be respected above all others. This respect, however, was laced with fear. For Japanese soldiers, the legend of the Marines became a psychological reality. An enemy that could endure, adapt, and strike with precision under conditions that would break most armies. The Pacific War, with its isolated islands and dense jungles, became the proving ground of this realization. Each encounter reinforced the same truth. Marines were not ordinary soldiers. They were a warrior class in modern form, embodying resilience, courage, and relentless aggression. Japanese soldiers feared the Marines more than any other Allied force because they combined physical endurance and training to handle extreme environments, tactical flexibility that defied expectations, cohesive unit leadership ensuring resilience under chaos, precision and lethality in both ranged and close combat, mental toughness that allowed them to keep advancing even when heavily outnumbered or wounded. The combination of these traits created an adversary that was unpredictable, relentless, and psychologically overwhelming. For the Japanese, who expected Western soldiers to break under pressure, this was a revelation, and a source of profound fear. By understanding these battles chronologically, from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, we can trace the evolution of respect mingled with fear. Every island, every ambush, every hand-to-hand fight taught Japanese soldiers the same lesson. The U.S. Marines were unlike any enemy they had encountered. It was not simply a question of strategy or weapons, it was a question of unbreakable human will. The sun sets over the shattered islands of the Pacific. Smoke still curls from craters and burned-out bunkers. The jungle, scarred and charred, slowly reclaims the land, swallowing twisted metal, abandoned weapons, and the memories of men who never left. But the stories remain. They echo through diaries left in foxholes, through letters hidden in satchels, through post-war interviews and memoirs. They tell of a fear unlike any other, a fear not of machines, not of bombs, not of firepower alone, but of men. Men who fought with a will so steadfast that even the most battle-hardened Japanese soldiers could not ignore it. The U.S. Marines. To the Japanese troops entrenched in bunkers on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, the Marines were something beyond human. They were force incarnate, relentless, adaptive, unyielding, seemingly immune to exhaustion, pain, and fear. Japanese accounts repeatedly describe the same impression, that these men advanced even when wounded, when surrounded, when hope had long since faded. The enemy expected hesitation, panic, or retreat. They found none. And in that absence of fear, the Japanese saw something familiar yet alien, a reflection of their own warrior spirit, amplified and modernized, forged in the crucible of an enemy nation. It was respect born of fear born of truth. Consider a Japanese soldier hiding in a collapsed bunker on Iwo Jima. His hands are blistered. His lungs burn from smoke and ash. His comrades are gone. Outside, Marines move silently, efficiently, through the black volcanic sand. He knows his fate is sealed. Yet in his final hours he writes, "They are not afraid. They advance as if death is nothing." How can men be so unyielding? This sentiment appears again and again in survivor diaries. It is not admiration alone, but a mixture of horror, awe, and resignation. The Marines were a mirror to the ideals Japanese soldiers had internalized, the Bushido ethic of unwavering courage, but executed in a form and scale that even seasoned Japanese troops could not withstand psychologically. This realization haunted survivors long after the war ended, leaving a lasting imprint on collective memory. It was not only about who won the battles, it was about how they fought and why. The legacy of this fear stretches beyond individual encounters. Across the Pacific, Japanese soldiers learned, often too late, that that the Marines were uniquely capable of combining human courage with tactical excellence. Where other enemies faltered under bombardment or jungle heat, the Marines adapted. Where others broke under sustained attack, they advanced. Where others hesitated at the night's approach, they infiltrated, ambushed, and struck with precision. This combination of traits created a psychological phenomenon. The enemy feared not just their weapons but their mindset. The Japanese had trained for honor, for courage, for endurance. The Marines embodied those same principles, but with modern training, relentless discipline, and unbreakable cohesion. And in the brutal theater of the Pacific, that was terrifying. Of course, this fear came at an unimaginable cost. On both sides, the islands are littered with bodies, mass graves, and memories of young men ripped from life. For the Marines, victory was never clean. Each advance cost dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of lives. And yet they pressed forward. For the Japanese, the cost was equally staggering. Entire regiments disappeared in a single banzai charge, in a single bombardment, in a single storm of coordinated fire. Even so, the Marines' ability to endure, physically, mentally, and emotionally, became their defining mark. And in the eyes of the Japanese, it made them more terrifying than any other Allied force. It was not hatred that motivated the fear, it was the recognition of a force they could not break. And in that, they saw a reflection of the human ideal they had been taught to respect, even if it came from an enemy. This is what separates ordinary fear from the enduring legacy of the Marines' impact. Across the Pacific, Japanese officers and soldiers, those who survived, repeatedly acknowledged the same truths. The Marines never surrendered, even when outnumbered or outgunned. They adapted quickly, turning the jungle, the shore, and even volcanic rock to their advantage. They kept moving even when wounded or when surrounded. They embodied a human resolve that was terrifying to behold. And through all this, the Japanese soldiers recorded not only their fear, but a deep, grudging respect. These were men they could not defeat easily. These were men who forced the Japanese to reconsider everything they thought they knew about courage, strategy, and human endurance. The psychological aspect of these battles is often overlooked. War is not only fought with bullets and bombs, it is fought in the mind. Every time a Marine advanced under fire, the Japanese saw unshakable will. Every time a small Marine squad infiltrated positions and eliminated a strong point, the defenders saw calculated aggression and adaptability. Every time Marines continued forward despite casualties, Japanese troops were forced to confront an enemy whose spirit was unbreakable. By the time campaigns like Saipan and Iwo Jima concluded, Japanese forces had internalized a simple truth. The Marines are not ordinary soldiers. They fight with a courage and resilience beyond comprehension. This recognition shaped not only battlefield behavior but also post-war reflections, memoirs, and the enduring legend of the Marines in the Pacific. After the war, historians, veterans, and scholars examined these encounters. What emerges is clear. The fear Japanese soldiers experienced was real, widespread, and deeply rooted in respect. It was fear born from facing an enemy who mirrored their own ideals, but executed them at a scale, intensity, and precision they had never imagined. It was a fear reinforced over years, battles, and islands. A cumulative understanding of the Marines' unique combination of skill, courage, and mental toughness. And it is this legacy that still resonates today. The U.S. Marine Corps carries forward not only the traditions of rigorous training and aggressive tactics but also a reputation forged in the crucible of the Pacific War. A reputation acknowledged even by those who once feared them the most. Standing on the shores of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, or Iwo Jima today, the scars of war remain. Ruined bunkers, twisted metal, and overgrown craters tell the story of a conflict that tested human limits. But beyond the ruins lies the deeper story, the story of human courage, resilience, and mutual recognition of skill and honor. The Marines were not just warriors, they were a force that reshaped the psychological landscape of the Pacific. They made the Japanese rethink what was possible in combat. They instilled fear not through intimidation alone, but through unbroken action, adaptability, and relentless determination. This is a legacy that endures. It is a lesson in courage, in strategy, and in the power of will. It is a reminder that fear can coexist with respect, that admiration can emerge from conflict, and that even in the darkest hours of war, the human spirit is tested, and sometimes transcends expectation. The Japanese feared the U.S. Marines more than any other Allied force. And history remembers why. Not because the Marines were invincible. Not because they fought without suffering. Not because they were machines. But because they faced fear, embraced it, and pressed forward anyway. Because they embodied a spirit that could not be broken, a resolve that could not be denied, and a courage that compelled even their enemies to pause in awe. In the end, the Pacific War was a testament not only to strategy or firepower, but to the enduring strength of human will. And the Marines, by their actions, carved a place in history that earned the respect and fear of every opponent they faced. Across islands, across jungles, across decades, that legacy endures. The Marines are remembered. The enemies they fought are remembered. And the lessons they left behind are remembered. Because courage is timeless. Because fear can teach respect. And because some wars and some warriors are remembered not for victory alone, but for the spirit with which they fought.